back. Sorry about that, guys. There was a dropout, but I.
Спасибо, другие.
Yeah, you do, and you'll clean it up.
Товарищ.
Yeah. There we go.
Thank you, comrades. Thank you to the GRU.
We're back. Oh, is the sound off? Hold on one second. No, we're okay. There we go. Back. We're good.
See, we must be doing something right because the Russians are clearly
coming for us.
Right?
Yeah.
No, I was just saying the more I watch this kind of stuff, and I'm not. Look, this isn't anything new, but the sheer volume of what we're seeing come out of Russia, this is unsustainable. And it puts the Russian power system in a no-win situation because you can't crack down on them because it's only going to make it worse.
Yes.
And you can't back off of them because you're now in the middle of this existential war in Ukraine. So there's no winning solution.
Right.
For Russia. This is their Vietnam, this is their, I don't know what to say. I mean, it's just...
Afghanistan was initially their Vietnam,
right?
And this is actually
This is like worse. Vietnam on steroids. Or this is like Afghanistan on steroids.
Right, yeah. Well, in Afghanistan, there were proxy elements.
And they were there for 10 years.
Yeah, we were supporting the Mujahideen and all that, and we kind of had to.
Which is what we're doing with the Ukrainians,
yeah, exactly.
To a certain degree.
Except there is not going to be a situation where Ukrainians who got a hold of weapons are going to now view America as the great evil. That doesn't happen.
As opposed to certain elements within the West who will go unnamed, podcasters that we can discuss,
yes, right.
But we won't.
Right.
They will have you believe that we are arming Nazis, and that in effect, that once they beat Russia, that there will be a wave of fascism in Europe, which is so completely just ridiculous.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. It's not going to be like Afghanistan.
So Afghanistan, by the way, Afghanistan, if you want to use it as kind of an example of how the Russians word things. So they, besides the fact that they were kind of like ticking puppets up in that place for a while, in the same way that they were doing with Ukraine under Yanukovych, is that they have these people and then they kind of jockey for position and then you play them against each other, so it's always destabilized. They think they like me better than they like this guy, and then they put you in power and then they kill you. If anybody saw my personal favorite Daniel Craig 007 movie, Quantum of Solace, because of the opening car chase, is one of the best ever. There's a scene where
is that the one in Italy, the beginning of the car sequence?
Yes, yeah, and he tells him, he's got Mr. White or whatever in the trunk, at the time to get out at the very end of the car chase. He's been in the trunk the whole time. The villain in this, who's a faux environmentalist who's lying to people all the time about what he's doing, and he's trying to help the people of the world and yada yada, and he's buying up all this land in South America, or gaining control of it by destabilizing countries, making them sign a contract and everybody's like, there's no oil there, and well, then we'll just get whatever we find, so none of your goddamn business. And it turns out it's just where all the water is, and they've been diverting all the water into these giant caves.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes, I do remember that.
And holding onto the water. So there's the idea being is that they ran the guy who did it before. They ran this guy, and then he basically says, "You'll sign it, or the guy who's going to take your place is going to put a bullet in your head." And that's essentially the way Russia has been running all these countries for a long time. That's how they ran Afghanistan, and they. It was so bad that they poisoned the leader of Afghanistan twice to kill him. He survived the first time because they didn't give him enough.
Okay, so you're talking 1970s Afghanistan.
Right, yeah.
Salam...
Yeah.
What was his name? He was a king, if I remember. Or no, he was a prime minister.
Yeah. So they've gone from the king to these jockeying prime ministers. And then they tried to poison him a second time, and it didn't work because he was drinking Coca-Cola with dinner, and the carbonation didn't work in the poison. It stopped him because he loved American Coca-Cola, which I think, again, is just kind of a fascinating aspect of stuff. And whatever these fuckers say about us, they're always drinking our soda and eating our food and watching our movies and wanting to meet our stars. It's hilarious.
Once I move to LA and I get all my stuff out of storage, remind me, I've got to show you one of my souvenirs from Afghanistan.
Oh shit!
Is a Coca-Cola bottle.
Right.
It is Coca-Cola, and it says bottled in Afghanistan. and the liquid is still in there. I haven't gotten.
Wow.
I wouldn't dare drink it.
Right.
But it's still in there. But the other thing that kills me about it is the fact that it was bottled. The bottle cap is a Pepsi bottle cap.
Oh sure, yeah, right.
It's fantastic.
It's just reused.
Yeah, who cares? It doesn't care.
It's like those suckers from Mexico that you can get that sell on the streets in downtown LA.
It's one of my great war souvenirs. And I love that thing.
The wrapper is so fucking tight that I always just picture somebody in the factory going, well, like that's how they get them to stay on, like black. So, anyways, so they poisoned the guy twice, and then they sent in troops. He thought the troops were there to support him against whoever tried to poison him.
Right.
And obviously it didn't work out well.
Yeah.
And he ended up dead. And there's two different stories. One that they shot him while he was still recovering from the poison, and the other one was they dragged him out and they put a grenade under him and blew him up in front of everybody else. And so, which nobody knows because nobody's talking, and he died that day. Yeah. So then they wiped out half of the villages in Afghanistan over the course of the next 10 years. They're trying to do a truncated Cliff Notes version of that in Ukraine, or they tried from the very beginning, and it's very similar. They just haven't gotten close enough.
So I saw your commentary about a certain idiot who is a Putin apologist and a podcaster here who I won't mention because I won't say his name.
He lives right near here. In a $1 million house as Marxists.
I know. Anyhow, and he was talking about how we're the bad guys, right?
Yes.
We're the bad guys. That video he put out recently.
Yeah. And
he was talking about how our war in Iraq was so much worse than what the Russians are doing, and 100,000 people were killed, and all the rest of it. And I found myself screaming at the screen, saying, "You jackass! There's over 100,000 people killed in Ukraine easily by this point."
Right.
And not only that, but as bad as we were, and I was in Iraq, I was in Afghanistan, I saw firsthand what we did. And we weren't angels. We didn't conduct ourselves like pristine, good guys.
That's why people at home were protesting against it.
Right.
None of us went to jail for doing it. None of us went to jail for
but also, like, we did things like we used depleted uranium rounds, and we did this. But name me one Iraqi city. Name me one Afghan city that we leveled.
Right.
Leveled.
Yes.
To the ground. And then look at pictures of Mariupol.
Right.
Look at pictures of Kharkiv, and you tell me the equivalency.
Yeah.
You tell me that we operated the same in Iraq and Afghanistan as the Russians are operating in Ukraine, or just how Russians wage war differently than we do. And I said it at the beginning of the war. I said to it, I could see this coming. I anticipated it, because if you look at Grozny, this is what happened. And if you look at Ukraine, as bad as what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's not a city in Afghanistan, not that there are a lot of cities in Afghanistan full stop, but there's not a city in Iraq that we flattened. We hit the telecoms building, we hit the green zone, we destroyed Saddam's palaces, we did a bunch of stuff. We didn't carpet bomb and obliterate
even shock and
entire city blocks.
Even shock and awe
was mostly precision.
And it was peripheral to the area. It was meant to, like, shut down the electrical grid, shut down these things, and then, oh my God, they've got control of our city. Right. But instead of just effectively
which according to this individual who won't be named, was we would have done that straight off. So how can we complain about the Russians taking out Ukraine's power plants? We did that at the very beginning of our invasion of Iraq. Sure, but then also we instantly went in and we built up their power grid. Again, the reason why there were massive blackouts in Iraq was not for lack of trying by the Army Corps of Engineers to reestablish it. It was because the insurgents knew that if we were able to reestablish the electrical grid, that they wouldn't be able to pay power. Right. So we that's not how we fight wars.
Yeah.
We're not saints.
And again, I would say
to compare what we did with what the Russians did.
And the biggest argument being is that back home, I and a lot of people like me, and
would have gone ballistic.
We marched.
And you did.
Yeah,
you did
did during it. I did it during the first one when Bush did it. And none of us got sent to jail for it. And eventually shifted policy in the same way that it marching in the United States shifted policy on Vietnam.
I mean, when we went into Iraq, and I was with the invasion force, the very first days of that war, I went over what was called the berm. I went over the berm into Iraq like day one, man. I was hour one. I was with the 3rd Infantry Brigade's aircraft division, and I was with them during the entire invasion of that thing, and we conducted ourselves completely different than the way the Russians did. I get really, really angry about this because it pisses me off, because I know those soldiers, and sure, there were nut jobs who were like, kill every Iraqi I see, let's just shoot them, all those sad N-words,
well, and also
which I did here.
Right, sure.
But we didn't flatten the damn place.
Right.
Look at Kharkiv. Yeah. Look at Mariupol. Look at Mariupol.
Yeah.
Look at that theater. Right. You tell me that we do the same things with the Russians. Fuck you, Jimmy.
Right, and you said the name. I know it's hard not to. I know. Well, and
fuck you. We're the bad guys.
Right.
What city did we flatten?
Right.
What city did we flatten?
We didn't. I remember distinctly there were people on calling into radios or calling into C-SPAN or something who were right-wingers at the time, who were mad about 9/11 and who were like, turn them to glass, send them back to the Bronze Age. Right. If we send them back to the Bronze Age, what's that, 15 weeks? I remember all those conversations. The difference between those conversations here and the conversations in Russia was that those were citizens calling into shows espousing these beliefs and getting angry, but the hosts themselves were like, oh, all right, simmer down. Yeah. Whereas that same conversation is happening on not just any show, but on the primary political show, that their equivalent of 60 Minutes, their equivalent of Tucker Carlson.
And there's no pushback.
There is none. As a matter of fact, if you soften the blow, everybody gets mad at you.
Everybody gets mad at you.
Right. It is an entirely separate thing. And once you give up on the idea, once you start selling the narrative that there's no difference between us and if anything we're worse, what you're really saying is that the system of checks and balances that we do have in our country are useless and should not even be tried, and therefore should not be protected, which is exactly the message the Russians want portrayed. And they're messy and nothing happens anyways, and we get shit done even if it's not stuff you like. It does happen, and that kind of stuff. And so that's who you hear, that authoritarian idea. It doesn't work because Russia's failing miserably. So is China. All the autocrats are having a fucking time in Sri Lanka.
Look, and the protests that we are seeing in Russia, I am happy to see them happening. But at this point right now, they're inconsequential. I'm sorry. There are not enough people out on the streets yet. Right. And also, in addition to that, and I speak to my Ukrainian friends back home as I'm preparing to go back in Ukraine. And I talk to them about this, and I say, hey, do you see that all this stuff happening in Russia? And they say, yeah, too little, too late. Right. Too little to screw you. For months now, we are now at month 7, bordering on month 8. Yeah. And our people have been slaughtered. Our cities have been burnt to the ground. We have hundreds of thousands of displaced people.
They're rigging grenades and mines and claymores under dead bodies.
This is what the Ukrainians say to their Russian neighbors. You knew this. Right. You knew this. You can pretend you didn't, but you knew it. And you didn't give a shit until there was mobilization. Right. And then suddenly you cared about the Ukrainian people and the war going on in Ukraine. Too little, too late. And there's a huge movement that you see in Europe, but you see coming from the people who are pissed off, the Ukrainians in particular, but those of us who support Ukraine, is this sense of no, don't let them leave. Don't let them leave. You should have been on the streets when the war started. And you didn't give a goddamn.
The Russians leaving Russia.
The Russians leaving Russia now are leaving because of mobilization, not because there are women and children who are dead.
There was a group.
Fuck.
Right. Yeah. Well, there was.
And I kind of sympathize.
Yeah. There was a guy who interviewed people who were coming across the border. Let's see. I want to say it was.
But this stuff does get my blood boiling because it's the false equivalency. This kind of convenient. Now I'm anti-war because I might be called up. All of this kind of convenient looking. Oh God, yeah.
Those are the Russian flights.
Right. The flights out.
After
it pisses me off because it's like, well, where have you been? Where have you been? Come on.
Yeah.
This is not new. All those flights leaving that you see have you seen another graph? Have you seen there's a meme out there of the dollar cost to fly from Moscow to Tbilisi as opposed to from Tbilisi to Moscow.
Right.
And it's like $6,000 to fly from Moscow to Tbilisi, $400 to fly from Tbilisi to Moscow.
Right.
So I find my compassion for Russians who are being called up to mobilization and who are protesting and suddenly now have a conscience.
Right.
I'm sorry, I just don't.
Well, I
don't have a lot of compassion for it because this has now been going on for so long, and it's I understand the argument coming from the Georgians, the Ukrainians, the Baltics, whatever. A lot of Europeans who say, "No, stay home and fix your country.
Right.
You don't get to get to the exit when things go south."
Especially when you were there benefiting
from it, or just pretending it wasn't happening while people were being slaughtered, and you knew damn well.
There was a guy who was interviewing, and I'm sorry I can't find it right now. This guy's a young
this kid.
He's a blogger he left.
He's finally gone.
Yeah, but he was he was one of the sanction watchers. Like, you could tell he would go around and see how much things cost and the experience of living there. And
he'd go talk to people on the street.
Yeah, he had this whole I used to be able to eat for $2 a day
with his purple hair.
Right. Yeah, and he's clearly not.
I forget the kid's name, but he's been very good.
Yes,
he's been very good, but he's the minority.
Yes,
he's not. He is a very well aware international Russian, and that is not.
That's fairly, right.
So, but I get he's finally left because of course he's finally left.
Right, because they're going to call up even him. Right,
or they're going to shut him up.
Right, they're going to do him in. Right, exactly. That's the interesting about Snowden becoming a fucking Russian.
I'm kind of surprised at that, frankly.
Well, his whole thing was it was presidential decree. I wonder how much he said. Also, he stopped tweeting for 2 months after when it started. And then when he started tweeting again, the stuff is oddly generic. Yeah. So I don't know that it's him.
Yeah.
And you're not seeing anything new. There's certainly no videos of him going, "Hey guys, this is what there's none of that," which is what, sort of your proof of life videos don't exist of him right now. And unless they're just we'll give him citizenship, send him to the front, fictionally send him to the front, and then he just died there, a hero for Mother Russia. Even Edward Snowden died for us.
He serves Russia's interests alive better than he does dead. But But
if he's already dead, what you do is you give him fake citizenship. Send him. I'm going off
to fight for Mother Russia.
Yeah, to fight for because I think this is so important and Nazis. And then they send fake Snowden to the front, and then unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right, and then he never comes back. That's the problem. And again, this is the issue with this kind of system. It's this goes back to the coup thing about Xi Jinping. So that story, even when it first came up, I was like, all right, he's had an aneurysm. There's all kinds of reasons why they will shut stuff down. Zero COVID, blah, blah. If he tested positive, he's going to go hide. He'll never admit that he caught it. So he'll just go write it out, and then they'll just sit around white-knuckling it for days until he clears and he doesn't need a ventilator, and then they're going to go back to normal. Or they know they're giving him Western, monoclonal antibodies or other treatments to solve his problem. They don't want anybody to know. He was treating his aneurysm with Chinese medicine traditionally, not brain surgery, so it could have just been, fuck it, he needs actual brain surgery, so we had to fly people in. It was an Iranian plane that flew in when all the planes were shut down. Could have very well been one of their doctors, because they have a fairly decent medical setup there for the rich guys, for the Khomeini and whatever. It wouldn't be surprising. So in that, I was like, all right, tap the brakes. I don't necessarily think there's a coup happening. That said, they are in the middle of this dust up between him and this other general who's taken this base and won't walk off, and he's removed this guy from his position, and the guy won't leave, and his soldiers are firing back against other PLA soldiers. And understand that the Chinese army, the PLA, is a private army. It is the army of the Communist Party. It is not the Chinese army. When people talk about the Chinese army, they don't represent China. They represent the People's Party. Yeah. The People's Liberation Army is specific to the Communist Party. And so that's why they can turn them on citizens if those people are insufficiently loyal to the party. Because imagine, if you will, how Republicans would react if the army was the army of the Democratic People's Army of America, right? That's what it is.
Right.
And anybody who's not that is fucked. And that's why they also don't have rules about policing their streets with soldiers, because that's how that shit works. So when that news came, it wasn't really about, and the same thing with the stuff about Putin being kind of invisible for a while or sick for a while or any of that shit. Because he could have just very well been poisoned earlier this year and managed to survive it. And he's, that
whole period when he was like bloated one day,
right,
and then
because
the next.
just like he did that shit to his own rivals. Somebody in there might have sprayed him in the face with something.
They do love their poison.
And they might have the antidote, but it still fucks you up for a while. That could, and then he'll be fine, but it's going to take a few months because it gives you basically a stroke or messes with your immune response or what. Yeah. That makes total sense.
Yeah, him bugging out to his dacha is very weird.
Yeah,
there's something going on there.
And
I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist about it, but I mean, it's look.
What it does point to that's not a conspiracy at all is the fact that these places are so opaque and so consistently full of shit that you can't know, which does not bode well as a functioning governmental policy for the rest of the world to like, hey, we should use their system, said no one ever. And then the same thing with the rest of the world in taking them seriously. So what people...
Well, it's not even like we should use their system. It's we should revert back to the law of the jungle, which is ultimately what autocracies are.
Right, yeah.
The biggest and the strongest gets to tell
it's silverback
everybody
diplomacy.
Else. Yeah,
right.
It's I'm the alpha, screw you.
Well, if the irony that China's wolf warrior diplomacy that they brought from that movie Wolf Warrior, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's fucking ridiculous. And it's so funny that if you watch all of the Rambo films, all of them, and the illusion that people have about what the Rambo movies are.
Yeah.
And that somehow they are just jingoistic, proto-America, like he runs around with an American flag, like, and sticks it into somebody's chest and goes...
Especially if you know the novel First Blood, or the very first movie, which was faithful to that book.
Yeah. I mean, the monologue at the end about his friend getting blown up by the kid with the shoeshine box in Vietnam, and how you're just seeing a man devolve because he has PTSD, and it's just triggering the skills you gave him, and you're not giving him any way to get home, which is really what the story was about. Like, you can't bring people directly home from war without helping them get used to the rest of the world again because you asked this of them. So, in all the movies, though, the second one, he's going in for POWs, and his military commanders won't let him get him out, just take pictures, and then they're going to hide it from the rest of the world. So it's a rogue agent thing. It's anti-American.
Did I ever tell you my story about the Louisiana National Guard during Iraq?
I think so.
This is relevant, but I know I keep telling my war stories. It's it's occupational hazard.
Understood.
So my story of the Louisiana National Guard is I was in Iraq when Katrina hit. And the Louisiana National Guard was at Baghdad International Airport, and it was their responsibility to patrol what was called Route Irish. It was the airport road that ran from the center of Baghdad out to what was Saddam International Airport, but when we took it over, it was called Baghdad International Airport. Very, very, I mean, at one point, the most dangerous stretch of road in the world.
Right.
It was always pucker time, we used to call it.
Yes, right.
When it was time for us to leave, and you had to go out on Route Irish, that stretch of ground when you were on it, leaving to get to your flight back home in Sanity, was...
Yeah, right.
Anyhow, so Katrina hits, and Louisiana National Guard is at the end of their tour anyhow, and they are given special dispensation by the U.S. command to go home early to assist with Katrina. And I was given the responsibility to be the international pool reporter, which basically just means instead of everybody sending a representative, I'm the one guy, and then I give it to NBC, CNN, CBS, ABC. So I'm the pool guy, and I go, and I'm on the plane with the Louisiana National Guard. We go back, we fly through Shannon International in Ireland, and then we go back to Texas. We go overland into Louisiana and to New Orleans. We rock up to a hangar outside of New Orleans, and the governor of Louisiana at the time gets up on stage and says, we're so thankful our boys are back, and blah, 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 blah. We are going to deploy them, and we will make sure that that New Orleans is maintained and security and control is maintained. She gets off, comes off the stage, and I am within ear distance of the conversation that she has with the commander of the unit. And the commander of the unit comes to the governor, and he says to her, with all due respect, ma'am, I am not sending my men into New Orleans. And he says, you have to understand, these men have just been pulled from one of the most dangerous roads in a war zone, in an active war zone. They are ready and primed to shoot first and ask questions later.
Right.
So this PTSD idea that you're talking about with Rambo, you're talking about with, what he said to them is, if you want a bunch of dead Louisianans, then put my boys down on the levee. Put them down on,
Right.
I don't know. I'm not very familiar with New Orleans.
Yeah, well, the levees are where it broke spread out into the quarters.
Into like the French Quarter.
Yeah.
All the flight. He said, they are of the mindset that they will shoot first, and you're going to have a lot of dead New Orleans, guys in New Orleans. And
which is why you don't put soldiers.
Which is why you don't. Right. Exactly.
Yes.
So I mean, it's an interesting story about PTSD, about military mindset, about war fighting as opposed to peacekeeping,
right?
One
of the things like
martial law,
and again, like the sort of, if you look at Rambo, for example, there's this idea that it's propaganda. It's a pro-America propaganda, right? That if you retrospectively, people have overlaid their idea of what it is over top of it, and so the idea is that China went and made their own Rambo. That's what they were going to do, and they made Wolf Warrior. And so if you look at the third Rambo film, it is dedicated to the valiant people of Afghanistan.
Oh, that one, yes.
The fourth one is
where he takes out a hind helicopter with an arrow.
Yes, yeah. Well, no,
he's got a demolition on the arrow, and he shoots. Doesn't he shoot the hind?
Yeah, he blows up a guy with it. He doesn't. His demo arrows don't blow up the helicopter. That one he fires. He's got a dead helicopter.
Dushka. He's got a Dushka.
Yeah. Actually, it's the same. It's one to one. But the point being is that there's all kinds of like, why are we here? What are we really fighting for? Can we really win again?
Yes.
There's all sorts of mixed messages in it. It is not this jingoistic, fuck you, like America, fuck yeah stuff. Like that's the joke around it. But the Wolf Warrior is. Wolf Warrior is like every white person in it, and for any black American also, is like, fuck you, Chinese. Like, you guys are weak. And he's like, this is for China, pow! Like everything is so fucking like him kicking people off of airplanes.
It's a good point.
It's cartoonishly ridiculous to that point.
And there is jingoism in Russia. The very, very. Yeah. But you make a good point in the sense that you know why that's like that? Because it wouldn't fly. If you actually put out a movie.
Right.
Of the level of Rambo.
Right.
Okay, so I know that there are stupid jingoistic movies out there that are like, America can do no wrong, and their soldiers are superhuman, and
that
and they don't do.
I mean,
they are, but they're B movies, and they're box
they're Steven Seagal movies, and they're done in Russia. And he's part of a rogue elite group that has to break away from the CIA, which is really the bad guys. Like, it's all shitting on America by proxy.
Right, exactly, shitting on America by proxy. But in these jingoistic societies like China or Russia, there's none of that. There's no reflection of like, our leadership is so bad.
Or there might be a question.
No, everything Russian is good. Everything Western is bad. Everything Chinese is good. Everything Western
bad.
It would never. No, because our audiences wouldn't sit for it. It wouldn't be palatable.
No,
it wouldn't
exactly.
be interesting.
Yeah, you couldn't even deal. Right.
No.
So it's interesting watching. There's this idea of Trump's America First idea. Even that, when he talks about it, is stupid and ham-handed as it is. It's about like taking care of our trade needs before other countries, or maybe not getting involved in a battle before. Like, it is not the same kind of like America First. If we want what you got, we're fucking taking it. Like, it's not even that. It could be. There might have been a time where they thought that was possible. Well,
the argument is there are guys in America that aren't really American. They're not not real Americans. Not like you and me.
That's right.
And of course the subtext is white.
Yeah.
But even without the racial elements of it, there's still the kind of like, there are true Americans. And then there are those they tend to go like Democrats or whatever. But
dude, it's fucking rural against urban.
It's all
half the
sorts of
time
stuff.
too.
It's all sorts of stuff.
But in watching those, like Volovyov and that crowd on Channel 1, even compared to like Tucker Carlson's completely nuts and full of shit. Even Sean Hannity is like a pro-American kind of thing. And even they say their most jingoistic shit with a touch of balanced, like, I would say balanced, I would say like almost apologetic energy to it. Like, it's still muted. It's not this like, fuck you if we want to, we do the thing. Like that, which is totally what's happening on that fucking show.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too, because like I would argue even the Soviets were better at this than modern Russia, because there's one of my favorite movies of all time, and I'm not even talking like Russian movies or There's a movie that it was produced in the Soviet Union in the early '80s, and it was a response to The Man with No Name, kind of spaghetti western kind of thing. They dubbed it in Eastern. It's a movie called the White Hot Sun of the Desert, Bely Soldier Pustini, and it's about a red soldier who's in the Civil War, and he's out in Central Asia, and the Civil War is won, and he is on his way back to European Soviet Union, kind of Petersburg kind of area. I think he's Rostov. And the only depiction there are depictions of Russians, ethnic Russians, because everybody else are all Central Asians, and they're just depicted as bandits and kind of like what I guess it would be our equivalent of how Native Americans were portrayed in like
or Mexicans,
or
like,
Mexicans, exactly. Yeah, but there is a white, and by that I mean white army. So there's a Bolshevik. I'm sorry, there's a Tsarist white army guy. He's the only one that's depicted as a Russian who isn't really. He's not really. He's from the old. And we have to broom that out. We have to get rid of that kind of mentality. So that's the only time in that movie. But what Russia has become is this. They don't even. Everything Russian. There are no dissidents in Russia, because if they portrayed that in modern day nationalistic fascist Russia, then their audience would go like, well, what is this? There are dissidents. There are people who aren't like the impression that Putin's Russia has tried to develop is that everybody is. You may have disagreement about this. You may have disagreement about this, but let's all admit that Putin is this great guy, and he is.
It's the exact opposite
that we're seeing right now, and the argument that's going on right now. This argument that came out post-mobilization on Russia's first channel, where they're talking about how bad it is that they're screwing up this mobilization by calling up 60-year-olds, but they're blaming it on the recruiting officers. They're not blaming it on the power elite.
Thank you, Karen, by the way.
Or Putin. They've even brought up the idea of like, if Putin only knew that these guys are screwing up the mobilization, surely he'd clean it up. There must be some disconnect.
It's because NATO / the deep state is screwing everything up. We would totally be winning against them normally, but they've got this whole thing. They've got super soldiers that are zombies that don't feel pain and eat babies. And I mean, they're literally floating that bullshit in the beginning. But I would argue
that's why the biolabs existed in Ukraine, is to create super soldiers.
Remember that whole story? Holy shit!
Still exists. They're still trying to pump that out.
The talking point, it's kind of died though. It doesn't really last.
Internally, domestically within Russia, it still exists. But.
Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere else though. No, they were hoping it
because it's ridiculous.
Yeah, right. But it's.
Only if you're an idiot, self-loathing American like the guy who lives near us.
I find it fascinating, and I've dealt with this over the years and watching what gets made and what doesn't in Hollywood. Was that there, for a long time, you could not see an American spy movie where they were on the good team doing the good thing. No matter what it was. Even though in reality, shit happens all the time. They were always a spy that works for a disassociated agency that works with it, and they have to go rogue to save the world. And
they won't let us torture people to find out where the prisoners are, so we better do it ourselves.
Well, that's the bad guy. So they
no,
want
that's
you
what the good guy too.
right. Well, and
That
this,
is the idea. Like,
well, that's
we're
24.
stoked. I mean, not just 24. I contend that we're so constrained by the. If we just let us do what
we want to do,
we want to do.
Right. That's right.
That's the narrative.
And and I would also say that that's also part of that false narrative as well, because there's a big bunch of those folks that are like, they'll tell you whatever you fucking want to hear, and you don't want to hear what they think you want to hear.
But the idea is that, like, us true Americans, the guys who are really, the guys who know how to get stuff done.
Right. Yeah, well, that's the old road cop, like, you know, if we're playing by the rules and the killer doesn't, we're going to lose. You know, that's Cobra. But, right? And you're like, if we want a civil society, we can't debase ourselves and just slaughter people. Sure.
Sure.
Which we, you know, it's an important lesson. That's fine. But anyways, like you rarely see a you know, anything where the bad guy isn't tied to the upper echelon of the people that you're working for.
Right.
Like, that's always the
it's always the
twist.
The third act twist.
Right.
Is always.
The call was coming from inside the house, and the house is CIA headquarters.
Right.
You know, what's interesting is I watched a movie a little while ago.
Simplistic.
I know,
so
but that's all. Like, that's been that way since I would argue. It's like it vacillated. As we try to make friends with other countries, we've tended to take it easy on them. And
in the post Vietnam
and post-Soviet era,
and the post Watergate and post Soviet,
right?
You know, there was a period of.
But it's. I was watching there's a.
One of the bad guys.
Yes, there's a Kevin Kline. Exactly. There's a Kevin Kline movie called The January Man, and like Susan Sarandon's in it, and it's it's an interesting movie. It's about this guy trying to figure out, he's the genius detective, and they bring him back on, and nobody wants to work with him because he's so weird and blah blah blah. But he's got to figure out who this guy is and how they do it. And he's got to put the whole thing together. And at the end of it, it's the most realistic version of what happens in those situations. If they catch the guy, and they're like, "Who is it?" And he goes, "Doesn't matter who he is. He was just going to keep doing it." Like, it wasn't like this, oh, he's works in the department and he snuck and he had this, and he's connected and he's the boss of his daughter's friend, and it was always him. And it's not, most of the time in life, it ain't that. No. It's just shitty people doing shitty things and good people trying to catch them and stop them. It's so fucking boring.
Okay, here we are supposed to be talking about, like, really important geopolitical stuff, and we keep talking about pop culture references. But I will bring up another pop culture reference. Sure. and one of the reasons why I realized that Malcolm Nance was, like, my kind of guy was when I heard his ringtone on his phone, and I hope he doesn't get pissed off at me if he ever sees this. He has the ringtone from The Prisoner. Are you aware of the old series? The old BBC British television series, The Prisoner? One of the best television series ever created. It's dated. Yeah. It's dated, but it brings up some really, really important issues. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, so the entire series of this movie, of the show The Prisoner, is him trying to figure out who's the guy, who's number two. Mm-hmm. Who's the beginning of the show is this refrain of, like, you are number 6, everybody's numbered, and so there's this, like, thing. I won't go into the depth of the entire deconstruction of The Prisoner, and he keeps saying, who's number 2? And they say, you are number 6. I'm not a number, I'm a free man. Ha 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 ha. Mm-hmm. And it turns out if you change that construction, it is, who is number 1 is the question the prisoner asks. And the answer from number 2 is, you are number 6. Mm-hmm. Not, you are number 6. Right. You are. Right. And at the very, very, I'm sorry I'm going to spoil this for those of you who have not watched a 30-year-old television, so 40, 50. Year-old television series, but I do recommend everybody to go watch it. If you haven't watched it, it's one of the best pieces of television ever made, in my opinion. In my humble opinion. Mm-hmm. The very last episode, he gets into the system, and he gets into where number 1 is, and he's a cloaked figure wearing a mask, and he pulls off the first mask, and he pulls off this mask. And it's his face, right? And he's like, "Oh my God," because it's surrealist. He's like, "Oh my God, it's me!" Right? But then he realized that's the mask, and he pulls off his own face, and it's an ape, right? So the message, I mean, it's pretty ham-fisted '60s kind of surrealist, like hippy-dippy stuff. But the message is, we're it's not like the elites are non-human beings.
Right.
They're full of foibles, full
Right.
of vices and greed and corruption and all the rest of it.
Crazy families that are supposedly in the Illuminati fucking eat themselves and do the same stupid shit and have the same like second generation rich kids are always assholes.
The problem is not that there's some sort of completely different kind of species on the planet. The problem is that we're all fallible, and we are all vulnerable to desires and fear, and that leads us to act. From another pop culture reference. What is it? Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to
the dark side. Right? Yeah.
So,
well, that's
anyway. I don't know. I just don't think that.
Here's what I was.
In a democracy, we realize that in a functioning democracy, we realize that as bad as our leadership is, that they're human, and the great thing about a democracy is we get to change them. We get to change it, which is why it's written in the it's in the system.
The thing I was trying to point out is that during the rise of China and the normalization of relationships with Russia since 1991, since the early 90s, on both of those fronts, the amount of funding for American films that has come bank shot through Russia via Cannes and other places, and China the same direction, has shaped what movies get greenlit in Hollywood. While China and Russia have been making increasingly jingoistic, proto-superhero, we can do.
And Americans being capitalists, we want to sell those films globally, so we got to consider a global market.
Right? They don't, though. They want to sell them internally because they serve a secondary purpose.
You mean the Chinese and Russians?
Yeah. So, but our movies, the ones they invest in, the ones that they'll greenlight are the ones where the bad guy was always an American on the inside, and it was your fault, and you started it, and it was without you there wouldn't have been a problem. I would argue all the Tony Stark movies are that way. Every Iron Man movie it's always his fault. He created the problem that he himself has to solve later. And that's how they used to do it. Now, that movie money has dried up. And what is being made, interestingly enough, that's popping through are things like the Atom Project on Netflix, and these are the newer funding from internal to like the Western world internal funding. Which is like this cute superhero time machine thing about dads and stuff. It's just like,
okay.
It's a Ryan Reynolds movie. And Jack Reacher, which is a very kind of almost Americana cowboy, like an old-fashioned 50s cowboy show, essentially. He's a military guy who comes into this town and ends up having to clean it up. But it's like a fucking Hulk episode that goes over 10 episodes because it's the evil developer who wants to control the town and, put a statue of himself in the center of town. Like, it's so 1950s and 60s, and it's like a 70s fucking Hulk episode. The whole show is 10 episodes of one Hulk episode from 1977. But that was when there were morality tales about American to American kind of exchange, and like everybody has some good in them, and people can come around, and then some people choose to be villainous, and then you on this basic level, it's not about the geopolitics of it; it's about human behavior. Good guys and bad guys, good women and bad women.
That's the point I was making with my prisoner references.
Exactly.
We're all. The problem isn't.
But while they were paying for it, if they were giving them money,
it's our animalistic kind of like.
If they were giving us money, it wasn't that root. It was that we are America's system is the problem. That we are an evil imperialist monster that has no good.
We're the world's terrorists.
Right, exactly. And that's where that comes from. But I'm telling you, that's 3 decades of fucking programming. Yeah. Because you're not going to find. The only jingoistic movie that has been made was literally a puppet show that was spoofing on the idea of jingoism.
Right.
Yeah, it was literally.
That's the closest thing we've had to like a big
world police.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So it's an interesting thing that the money that's coming in now, we're kind of like Netflix and others are using money that they get from the community. So we're seeing more community-based. Filming because what do people directly want to see because they're doing it from a subscriber base. Very different studio system than you would have from movie studios, right? But it's fascinating to me. You take that Russian and Chinese money out of the equation, And all of a sudden, the stuff that was being shelved that would have gotten greenlit because the audience might like it for years, that was going, no, we like this one better. Well, we can get money for this one. They'll we sent them the script. They liked this one. It's very telling. So, anyways, we're at the end of the show because I got to pack up and get my shit together and go over and do a comedy show.
We could do this for a lot longer. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, we could.
And I wish we'd got maybe some. Yeah, I'm trying to see if there's maybe a question or something we can answer. Because we went all over the place.
Somebody's saying I like Delta Force.
It's an organic conversation.
It is. Fuck 10 Cent. I agree. There you go. Somebody was saying I like Delta Force. I agree. That's by the way.
That's another.
That's where the money came from.
Right.
Israel, by the way. That's
Golan
and Globus. And those guys were on the same team with us in the same kind of problems, and we're saying this is not a bad thing.
Flying motorcycles.
Yeah. Well, that's the third one. The second one. Third one. Yeah.
Love it.
Thanks, guys. Oh,
thanks. Yeah, we're wrapping up. Has anybody got a concrete question? And then we'll wrap it up.
We'll do it at the tail end. Like button for. Thank you, Crazy.
Like a concrete question about, since I'm here, Ukraine.
Thank you, Crazy Insane.
Somebody asked me a question, and I know Hal and I have a tendency to kind of go off on tangents and just follow an organic conversation.
Right.
And I hope that's of use to you. I know that we don't have like
what's the opinion?
We don't have like a list of talking points to
Here's one.
We just talk.
What's your opinion of the whole Chris Hayes comments? Now, I don't know if you saw Chris Hayes' comments.
No, I didn't. So let's do it.
He's doing this thing like, and I
was traveling.
I got pissed at him. So I'll show you what I wrote because I was like, "Fuck you" to Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes was playing this whole like, well, the thing we need to know is. And I'm looking for it right now because I know.
Going back to the beginning of the conversation, yes, I do believe that it was Russia who did it internally for domestic reasons because the hardliners wanted to shut down.
Chris Hayes was responding to this guy Ross Barkan, who I don't know, but he goes, "I'm fascinated by this answer. Imagine thinking this way about Iraq war, police brutality, or ludicrously expensive healthcare. Some on the left, at least, are out of answers or ambition. And the reason is this guy Phil McCallion says, "What do you want me to do?" Because Matthew Iglesias said everyone is surprisingly chill about the clearly elevated risk of nuclear war. Now, no, it's not clearly elevated. The threat of it from Russia, and they're talking about it, does not mean it's clearly elevated. It also means that just because you talk about something, you're less apt to use it in the case of nukes in that regard.
Well, again, the only aspect of it, the only value in your arsenal, in your toolkit, if you're a military, the only thing that a nuke does that other weapons don't do is a deterrent.
Right.
And once you use it, that's the
so interestingly enough, Chris Hayes' response was, the more concrete problem is what course of action a U.S. citizen could agitate for to lower the risk. I think probably the best answer is to cut off weapons to Ukraine and lean on them to sue for peace now. But if that's the way forward, people should make the case. And it's not. And so
of course it isn't.
My response was tepid as usual. I wrote, "Honey, it's technically not rape if we just make her marry him, and then at least he'll stop beating her. She's 12. I know, but..." Yeah. And that's exactly what
it's a conversation we've had in the past of like...
acquiesce.
And also the way that we talk about this war, and I think a lot of what has motivated the war for Russia is their sense of self, and part of their sense of self is empire.
Right.
And so their biggest jewel in their crown of empire was Ukraine. Think about the Brits and Ireland, or India.
Imagine if Afghanistan was actually useful land. Because again, Afghanistan, they call it the graveyard of empires, and not because people fought to have it. But people died realizing it wasn't worth a fuck. Yeah. Afghanistan's borders are created by where people don't want to go any further.
When you're wounded and dying on Afghanistan's plains, and the women come out to cut up your remains, just lean on your shoulder, just roll on your rifle and blow out your brains and go to your God like a soldier. Rudyard Kipling.
Right. Jesus Christ.
We used to quote that all the time in Afghanistan.
Sure.
There's no point. There's fucking no point to taking Afghanistan.
Right. Well, that was the thing, is that the borders for Iran and Afghanistan are not based on where the Afghans said this is ours. It's where the Iranians said you can have it.
Well, there is a similarity with Afghanistan in the sense that it's not the territory itself, but rather that it's a thoroughfare to other empires that you might want to attack. And in many ways, this part of Europe is... I mean, obviously, it's a fully fledged, developed part of the world, whereas Afghanistan is at the rooftop of the world, where it's very difficult to maintain or build. But there's a lot of similarities in the fact that, like, Ukraine is a transit point for which is why I think this war is so important. Because once this is concluded, there will be no discussion of who owns the territory between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea.
Right.
And that has been a thoroughfare for imperial ambitions. And that's Russia is being one of the reasons why this is so important for Russia is that it is dissuading the idea that Russia is an empire, that you can expand your idea of what it is to be Slavic, that your Russian orthodoxy can be spread. And that is going to, and when they aren't able to reconquer Ukraine and determine what it is to be Orthodox or Slavic, that's going to, then they're going to have to look internally, and they don't like that. So, you know, this is incredibly important. I think, again, as we're wrapping up, I urge everybody who has been with us for all these months and who's listened to me ramble on, is that this is really important. This is probably the most important war. Unless maybe Iraq had gone a different way, but that's neither here nor there. That's ifs. But this is concrete, and this is happening. This is going to change the politics of Europe. It's going to change the politics of Western-Eastern relations, and it's going to change what Russia is on the global stage. And that has always been, I don't want to say a spoiler, but it is always, you know, Russia has exerted its influence, and it is now going to have to change its own sense of who it is, and then subsequently come back onto the global stage as hopefully a more constructive member of the global community. But this is an incredibly important event. This war is the most important war I've ever covered, for sure, and And I also I think the Ukrainians are just such wonderful people that don't deserve what's happening to them. And I'm very optimistic about their future, but this is just really tough. So, you know, this self-loathing stuff, this idea that Ukraine brought it on itself, this idea that NATO provoked Russia and they didn't have a choice, this whole thing of like, you know, the girlfriend who has been abused by her boyfriend for so long that we've talked about. If I can't have you, no one will. If I can't have you, no one will. Oh, and by the way, you know, how dare you date someone else? I'm gonna teach you that I love you.
By putting cigarettes out on your forehead.
I mean, it's just so support Ukraine, folks. You know, it's going to get better. This war is going to end, and everybody's going to be better for it. Even the Russians, though they don't realize it at this point. But you know, there's a reason why the Ukrainians are fighting as hard as they can, and it moves me deeply to see what they're doing, and the fact that they are willing to, this argument that like NATO's going to fight the war at the very last Ukraine, you know, screw you. That takes away Ukrainian agency. The Ukrainians themselves, they're doing this. Chris Hayes it's Chris Hayes that said, "Fuck you, man." I mean,
it's gross.
The only thing that's going to do, if we take away our weapons, is it means that they're going to go to a partisan war, or a guerrilla war, or an insurgency. They will never stop fighting because this is everything. It's everything. And they have a right to self-determination. And you know,
and since we believe in
if there's ever a cause worth dying for, it's this one. I mean, God forbid it gets to a point where I have to pick up a weapon, but man, if I had to, I would, because this is right. It's right. This is a black and white issue, and it is that Moscow doesn't have the right to do this.
Chris has had this weird, like I usually
there's a lot of it,
but he's like a marzipan tanky. You know, he's not full, like, he's just one of these kind of like the plush toy version of a tanky.
Oh, wait a minute. One quick second. You really do have to go, don't you?
Pretty soon. Oh, yes, right.
Should we?
Yeah, sure.
All right. I bought this for HAL in Chicago, but I didn't get it. So we're going bang on. Yeah, we're going to have one. This is called...
I have to do a show. The people will leave.
No, it's one bite.
All right.
Just taste it.
Just saying.
This is called Charam Shah. It's pickled garlic stalks.
It's fantastic.
No, you don't like it.
No, I do. I'm not kidding.
I think it's tasty.
It's lovely. And what's it called? Charam Shah.
Charam Shah.
Right. Which is, I was saying earlier, is a period in Klingon's life where they can't get laid. I must face Charam Shah. What was that? After stink of garlic and no one will fuck me.
All right. Well, thanks for letting us ramble on, folks. Hal, thanks for visiting.
Just because he's challenging me about this, I'm having the second one. Yeah. Because that's how...
I will be back in Ukraine within the next 10 days, give or take. We'll do it from there next.
It's pickled garlic stalks.
Yeah. I founded a little shop in Chicago, in Ukrainian Village.
Yeah, but me and Johnny Million got to hang out because I had to run off.
You had to run off, like you have to run off now.
Yes, right.
So let's not bang on. But thanks to everybody for tuning in. I'm sorry we kind of ramble sometimes, but
I'm not.
It is what
the conversation is. This is what it is.
Exactly. So, but keep supporting Ukraine. Keep watching. I'll keep doing stuff.
Yes.
A lot of people will say that I ramble on too much and I should get my own show. Well, maybe that might happen, but
we're working on it.
Yeah.
I'll help them set it up and stuff, and it's got value. The conversation needs to happen, and the more voices, the better.
We'll keep
in this
doing
space.
it.
It is.
And when I get back to Ukraine, I'm going to kind of do things a little bit differently than what I did the first time. I think I'm going to set up more like a studio where I can bring in people and interview them and have more of a discourse.
Great.
As opposed to reports. So.
That's awesome, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys. I'm going to sign us out and then head out, and I will see you guys, some of you, tonight at Flappers. And if I don't see you there in person, the live stream will be available to patrons, and then it might actually, because they have it set up, go out to everybody again. So if it's not behind a paywall, I'm sorry, patrons. I'm sure you're okay with it, because eventually everybody gets to see it, just not live. And tonight is the hardest part for me today. Is not thinking about anything I might want to joke about. It's the pruning that out so that I can come in with a fresh mind and just start talking without any prepped material. Because if I have early in the day, if I go, that would be funny, maybe I should, I have to fight it. Otherwise, my brain will write a bunch of jokes in my subconscious, and then they'll just, and it feels like cheating. Anyways, very weird. Much love to you guys. I'll see you later. The music was playing, and we're on our way out. Hold on, wait, where's the sound effects? There we go. Yeah, now it's coming. Okay, see you guys. Take care of yourself, and take care of somebody else. And where's my little screen so I can go to the show? There you go. To the end of the thing, and the da-da-da-da. Okay, there we go. All right, see ya.